Hi, I'm Kirsten, the Ectopic Pregnancy Support Podcast host. Thank you for listening, and I hope these stories and conversations bring you comfort and help you feel less alone. Enjoy this episode. Hello, Cara. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good, Kirsten. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for being here. I know a little bit about your story, and this is a more recent experience for you. So I just want to say thank you. But before we get into it, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. How old are you? When did you get married? And where are you from?
So my name is Cara. I am 32. I'll be 33 next month. I'm from New Jersey. I grew up in Central Jersey, but now I live in North Jersey. My husband and I were married July 14th of 2024, and that was the third anniversary of our first date.
Oh, that's so cute.
Yeah, it was July 14th is Bastille Day. And on our first date, I said to him, "Do you know what today is? It's Bastille Day." Because we met on 4th of July. So I joked that we were Independence Day only.
That's so cute. And how fun that you're coming up on your 1-year anniversary.
Yeah, we're trying to plan a nice little trip to, celebrate, especially with how hard this year's been.
Yeah, you should definitely celebrate because 1 year is a big anniversary.
Yeah,
It may not seem like it, but that first year is so big for you as a couple. And then considering your situation as well, it probably made for a hard experience in your first year of marriage.
Yeah, it definitely was a test, but I think we came out stronger.
Yeah. I say that all the time about my husband and I after our ectopic is, yes, we were strong before, but we were so much stronger after.
Yeah, because you don't usually go through something that traumatic in the first couple of years of a relationship, and to see your husband go through something when you're going through something and how they're going to react, you can say you're going to react a certain way, but he was my rock through all of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm glad that you had him for support.
Thank you.
So you got married in July last year. When did you decide you wanted to start a family?
So we've known since one of our first dates, we had agreed that we wanted 3 kids. It's always been something we've both known, is that he wanted to be a dad. I wanted to be a mom. And my birth control actually lapsed in April of last year. So that's when we really started tracking. I actually have the MTHFR gene. I think I'm saying it right. But I've known since I was 19. My mom actually had ovarian cancer. So when she went through genetic testing, they found it. So I went through the testing as well. I did have the gene. So I was told that in order to keep a pregnancy, I would have to be on certain prenatals 3 months before I even started trying. So I was, tracking my cycle from April before the wedding. And then we had to move. We moved 3 hours north of where we were living. And with the move, we didn't want me to be pregnant during the move. My brother's getting married in August, so I didn't want to miss his wedding. So we planned on starting in December. And then we wound up getting pregnant in January.
So right away.
Yeah. And it's funny because I was actually convinced I was not pregnant that month. So I sort of took the test to say, as soon as I see it's negative, I'll get my period and start my next cycle. And, I know it didn't happen this cycle. And then when I saw the second line, I was, oh, okay.
Yeah. Were you kind of like, were you shocked that it happened that quickly, especially with your health history?
I always thought it would either be the first month or I would take forever. So when it didn't happen December, I was thinking, okay, I have this many months until I'm a overanalyzer. So I was thinking I have this many months until I can see a fertility specialist, If it's not the first month, it's going to be 6 months down the line or longer. So when I did have it the second month, I was shocked. He was shocked. And
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a big shock to see those two pink lines when you first become pregnant.
Yeah. And I had never taken a test before. I mean, I had taken them in December and had negatives, but before, I've never seen a positive pregnancy test before.
Right.
So to see it for the first time, you're like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, like it's real. There's something in there. I can't believe this happened. Okay, so do you know the date that you tested positive?
I tested positive January 25th.
Okay. All right. So January 25th, you tested positive, and then what happened next?
So I had started researching because my OBGYN did no longer did obstetrics. And she also was too far for me to be traveling down to go to her office for any visits. So we first looked at, I did a top-down approach to my research where I started looking at the big hospitals in the areas that had NICUs, because God forbid something happened. I wanted to know which hospital we were going to, how close it was. So when we did the hospital tour, we picked a hospital, and then I found in that same branch, there was one that was only 10 minutes away from where we're living. And then I found a doctor who worked out of there.
Okay.
So I called them. I looked up, reviews. I asked in the Facebook chat which doctor everybody used in the area, and they all recommended this office. So I called and made the appointment. And they wanted to see me at 6 weeks, 1 day.
Okay.
I have the other dates down here. So I did not feel normal. I felt like I would feel pregnant. I knew what all the symptoms were, and I wasn't really having any.
Okay.
And that made me a little nervous. So I was apprehensive going ahead into this appointment. And then, so the 25th was my positive pregnancy test. And then on February 6th, we went to dinner with the neighbors across the hall. And I had some weird cramping. And I was Googling it, and I said, oh, this is probably just implantation. It should be normal. And then when I got home, I had some bleeding. And it was more than spotting, and it was brown. So I'm Googling, what is this? What could it be?
The Google rabbit hole.
Yeah. But unfortunately for me, I wish I had seen more negative when I was Googling. I actually saw everything's normal. Everything's normal.
Yeah.
Anything that you have, it's normal in pregnancy.
Yeah. And it gives you such a sense of hope.
Yes.
Like, oh, okay, yes, I have cramping. Yes, I'm spotting, but nothing is wrong. It's a normal symptom, so I'm going to be fine.
Yeah, exactly. It was just everything was, this is normal. It's normal. It's normal. So that following Monday, the February 10th, was my first appointment for the doctors. And throughout this, I would have, 2 days where I'd be nauseous, and then it was gone. I had, insomnia for 3 days, and then it was gone. I would have different symptoms, and then they would all just go. And the only thing that really stuck around was the sore breasts. So when I went to the doctor on Monday, I asked for them to test my HCG and my progesterone, because I felt like this must be a miscarriage if all of these symptoms are going away. So they did the test, and my HCG was 1926, I believe.
Okay.
And then I went back for the repeat Wednesday, and it was 2,700.
Okay. When you went into your OB appointment that day you had your first HCG, did they do an internal ultrasound or anything like that?
No.
Okay. So what was the appointment, just to talk through?
To meet the doctor's office,
Okay.
and to, they just do a confirmation appointment where they basically have you come in They usually don't even do the blood test. I requested it. And
Okay.
they just say, oh, you come in with missing period is what they call it.
Okay.
And then, they ask you about your cycle, where it is. And then they say, congratulations, you're pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. So
Interesting.
yeah, my ultrasound was supposed to be at the end of February. So they
Okay.
scheduled the confirmation and then the ultrasound.
Okay. Which
Um,
was probably at your 8-week mark,
I think
right?
it was between 8 and 10.
Okay. Yeah, I think the 8-week ultrasound is what is very normal
Yeah.
for women who test positive. And I think it's pretty normal not to have blood work done. But of course, like um, following an ectopic or a high risk pregnancy, if you were to test positive for pregnancy, they'd probably ask you to do blood work right away. But with a normal pregnancy, yeah, I don't think they ask you to do
Yeah.
that. But
So
that's good. I'm glad that you asked for that.
yeah, I know. My one of my friends, she has a 5-year-old now. So she was joking and making fun of me. She's like, I didn't do any of this when I was pregnant. Like, you're going overboard.
Mhm.
So I just kept saying, I was like, I feel like there's something not right.
You knew in your heart that something was going on that was
Yeah.
unnormal.
Yeah. So the first test was Monday, the second was Wednesday, and the doctor's office called me at 8:30 Thursday morning.
Oh.
And I had been checking the portal. I hadn't even gotten the results back yet.
Mhm.
And she said, we want to check the placement of the pregnancy. We want to bring you in earlier for the ultrasound. So as soon as she said that, I said, okay, that means they think it's ectopic. But they couldn't get me in until Tuesday, which was February 18th for the ultrasound. So
Mhm.
now I went through Valentine's Day weekend working in a restaurant.
Oh.
And I'm, as I've said, a huge planner. So I'm Googling where's the nearest hospital to work? Where do I go if it is ectopic and I start getting the shoulder pain um and good old Google, everything's fine. You can have slow rising HCG. It doesn't mean anything. It could be fine. So going through the weekend, I just kept thinking, okay, there are 3 options. Everything's fine, and it's
Mhm.
just slow rising. I'm having a normal miscarriage is option 2, and option 3, worst case scenario, it's ectopic.
Mhm.
Um,
Remind me your HCG numbers, the first and second draw.
the first one was 1927, I think, and the second one was a low 27.
Okay.
So,
So they didn't double, but it was still a good jump.
yeah. So that made it harder because when you're
Yeah.
reading the stories,
Hmm.
a lot of people are saying, "Oh, I had similar numbers and everything
Right.
was fine."
Right. You
Um,
go to Google or um, Facebook groups, or there were some apps that had forums. And I remember always posting on there, whether it was my HCG numbers, my symptoms, almost just trying to find validation that I am not crazy and something is off. Yet when I turn to Google, it always steers you into, oh, this is normal, but it also could be this. It's
yeah,
really hard. It's very confusing.
yeah. And it's hard going through that for 4 days, going back and forth between crying that your pregnancy is going to be over either way, thinking, no, I'm hopeful, everything's going to be fine, to um, I got to Monday and I remember I was at work and I said to them, can anybody work my shift Thursday? Because I feel like it's not going to be good and I feel like I'm not going to be able to come in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and at that time, I had shared with my fellow managers what was going on just because I like sharing and joy,
Mm-hmm.
and if it did go bad, I thought they're going to need to know either way because I'm not going to be able to work. So,
right. And
um,
it's nice to share because you'll have that support system if it were to go in a bad direction.
yeah.
I'm really sorry that you had to go those few days, especially during Valentine's weekend, without an answer, because those waiting periods are so hard. It's so hard not to think about because it's all that you're thinking about.
Yeah. And for me too, it kind of was, you know, enjoying my first time being pregnant and thinking, okay, well, this might be, I remember saying Monday, this might be the last day I'm pregnant with this pregnancy. So I should just enjoy it while I have it. Sorry.
Hey, it's a very serious and traumatic thing to think about.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry. Don't be sorry. So you truly felt on Monday that this is not normal.
Yeah.
Something is
Monday,
wrong.
I called my mom and I said, tomorrow's going to be bad news. I just know it. And even Tuesday morning, waking up, I looked at my husband and I was so close to saying, I should take a bag in case we have to go straight to the hospital.
Mhm.
But I didn't want to worry him.
Mhm.
And I wanted him to enjoy what was happening. Um, and I then prepped him and I said, okay, these are pictures of what ultrasounds look like. This is what, if, I'm a normal 7 weeks, this is what it'll look like. This is 6 weeks. This is 5 weeks. This is, if it's ectopic, you'll see nothing. This is what it'll look like. So I had prepped him thinking he's going to be in the room and he'll be able to see the screen better than I can.
Mhm.
So, just to prepare him for any of it.
Yeah.
Um, and it was so funny because he said to me, you should eat something before we go. And I was thinking, I probably shouldn't because just in case. And then I thought, no, I can't think negatively like that. I had a yogurt smoothie,
Okay.
um, which, foreshadowing, delayed my
Yeah.
surgery.
Oh.
So we went to the office and the ultrasound tech came and got us. And I have to say, this office did a phenomenal job because I just was so impressed with how they handled this whole day.
That is
So,
amazing to hear
yeah,
because we don't always hear that.
no, from this entire day, I have to say, this doctor's office, it was phenomenal. So they brought me back. I'm already emotional. And I say to the tech, we're here to check for placement. They're concerned it might be ectopic. So she takes the wand and checks outside of my stomach and doesn't do the transvaginal first. And she says, oh, no, I definitely see something in there. I think you're okay. So I'm like, okay. So then she switches to transvaginal and takes about 2 seconds. And then she says, okay, I'm going to let you know I don't see anything in your uterus. So I
Wow.
was so glad that she was talking me through it instead of me just sitting there, sitting
Mhm.
in silence, waiting and not knowing.
Mhm.
Um, and I just remember looking at my husband's face, staring at the screen, almost like he's willing something to be on the screen. Um, and she took a couple minutes. She said, I'm going to take a couple pictures. And she said, yeah, I'm not seeing it. I don't even see it in the tube. So then, I'm thinking, did I make this whole thing up? Was I never even pregnant? And I was like, no, I took the blood test. I had the HCG blood test. There
Yeah.
definitely was something at some point.
Yeah.
So she said, who have you spoken with in the office? And I said, I've only spoken to the nurse practitioner. She said, let me grab her. She's in another appointment. She takes us to a side room without going through the waiting room, without seeing anybody. And my husband looks at me and he says, I'm going to go to the bathroom. And before he could even step back into the room, the the nurse practitioner was back, and she said, they found nothing on the ultrasound. We think it's ectopic. I was like, can we just wait until my husband comes back into the room so that I have somebody else hearing this to process it?
Mhm.
So he stepped back in. She said, I've already spoken to our doctor who's on call at the hospital. You're going straight there. They're expecting you. They're probably going to give you methotrexate. It's a shot. It will dissolve the pregnancy slowly. You'll come in every other day for blood work to make sure that your levels are going down at, what is it, 14, 13, so whatever the percentage is that your HCG is going down. You know, this won't prevent you from having any pregnancies in the future. We have so many who go on to keep having them, have multiple children after this. You'll be high risk from now on. So you'll be in as soon as you test positive. We'll be checking your HCGs. As soon as you get to 2,500, we'll be doing an ultrasound so that this doesn't happen again, you know, that we can hit it early next time. So I was very impressed that it was a lot of information, but at least I wasn't left asking questions when I left the doctor's office.
Yeah, I love that she added the messaging relating to, I know this is a lot, but other women in this situation have gone on to have babies, to give you some reassurance and hope that this isn't the end.
Yeah.
I love that she said that.
Yeah, she was incredible. So then they sent us out through a back door, so we didn't have to go talk to anybody. And as we were walking out, the nurse in the front said, "Oh, do we have our follow-up appointment?" But before I could even react or say a word, the ultrasound tech came running out, and she said, "They're good. They know what they're doing. They have their instructions." So I just was so impressed with the office making sure to take care of every single thing on the way out.
Sounds like the office you went to needs to do some sort of training for other facilities. The way they handled it seemed really great.
Yeah, I couldn't have asked for more. I couldn't imagine, from hearing other stories and listening to other episodes of the podcast, I would have been, you're already devastated. So then to have to explain it right after, when you don't even know what's happening, would be terrifying. So we went straight to the hospital. I called my mom and she came up to meet us. I texted work because my first thought was, let me make sure my shifts get covered. And we get to the hospital. As soon as we get to the desk, they were incredible too. I mean, the standard of care was wow the entire day. She said, "Sweetheart, don't worry about it. We see this all the time. You're okay. We did know you were coming. We're getting a room ready for you. We're going to make sure you have a private room with a door." So then when I even went in for the checking in work where they do your blood pressure and everything like that, she was like, "Your blood pressure's so high." I was like, "Well, I wonder why." So she was talking to me about different stuff. She actually grew up near where I grew up, just trying to calm me down. She was like, "No, I'm getting your room ready right now. You're going to have a door. You can have how many people are coming to visit you, you know, because we're going to make sure that you're allowed to have as many visitors as you want." So that was incredible. They did blood work when I got into the emergency room. And then they took me for a follow-up ultrasound. And while I was in there, similar situation, my husband was allowed to come into the room. So he sat and held my hand, and she paused and looked at me and said, "Just so you know, this is going to be just the blood flow to your ovary. This is not a heartbeat." So, you know, even though she didn't say anything else, I had already known that there wasn't anything in my uterus. So just to be able to make sure, hey, if you do hear the whooshing sound, don't worry about it. You know, just to not raise my hopes unnecessarily. So I was impressed with that. Unfortunately, my blood work came back that my HCG had shot up to 7,000.
Wow.
Yeah. So they said, with it being that high and with us not even finding it in the tube, let alone in your uterus, they said, we recommend surgery. We want to remove your tube. We don't think that we should even give this a chance to keep going. She said, if we give you the methotrexate, you still run the risk of it bursting, especially with it being that high. It'll take a second dose, maybe even a third dose of the methotrexate. She said, you know, you won't be able to be in the sun all summer. You won't be able to eat certain foods all summer because we're trying to make sure this goes down. They said this is a high level for it to go down. We recommend the surgery. So this was the doctor from the ER, not my office.
Okay.
And it's a lot.
That's a lot of information to wrap your head around, because you go from your office thinking you're just going to get methotrexate. And I'm sure you were Googling on your way to the hospital about what it is and what recovery looks like and all of that, to being in the ER and being told that your numbers are too high for methotrexate and you need surgery. And there had to have been so many questions and thoughts going through your head.
Yeah. It was, why can't you just cut it out from where it is? And then you don't think of the questions in the moment because you're so overwhelmed with everything that's happening. So I said to the ER doctor, can you give me a minute to think about it? And then I also want to talk to the doctor from the doctor's office. No offense. But, I had my husband there. I wanted to talk to him because my immediate thought was, yes, just take the tube, get it over with, because I couldn't imagine. I know you went through the methotrexate. I couldn't imagine sitting there knowing slowly what's happening to you. And I said, that would be so hard on me mentally. I said, if I can just, take the tube, have them look at the other side and make sure that there's nothing wrong, that there was nothing that caused this, and that I won't have an issue going forward. I said, I would rather just get it over with. And my mom and my husband were both there at the time. And when they left, they said, are you even thinking about the methotrexate? Please just get the surgery and get it over with. So I was grateful that they were on the same page that I was.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So by the time the doctor came in from the office, she was saying, that's when she told me, your numbers are 7,000. She said, if it hasn't burst already, she's like, do you have any of the shoulder pain, any of that? I said, no, I've had some cramping on my left side for the last couple of days. I said, but, I thought it was just gas, regular pain from everything.
Yeah.
So I said, can you just cut it out of that spot and leave the tube? She said, that leaves a scar. So it'll be likely that it'll just occur in that same spot over and over again. And then anytime you get pregnant down that tube, you have to be worried about it again. So I said, all right, let's do it. They said, have you eaten anything today? I said, yeah, my husband made me. So they scheduled the surgery for 5:00.
Okay.
And I just remember going into the surgery and thinking, I'm going to wake up not pregnant anymore. And this was something that we both wanted so badly. And to know that you're going to go to sleep and it's going to be over was hard. Very hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, not only those emotions, but the emotions of your future too were probably flooding through, because there's so much unknown about it. But yeah, I just can't imagine, being wheeled into the OR, knowing you're pregnant and knowing your situation, to, like you said, when you wake up, you won't be pregnant and it'll just be over. Because I wasn't in that situation, I cannot imagine those feelings, because it's very sudden. It's almost like whiplash, right? Like it happens and then it's over and you're kind of left with all of these thoughts.
Yeah. And, it's hard because then you're physically healing and emotionally healing. And then you're in physical pain and emotional pain. And I just remember waking up and it hurt so bad. And I was not expecting it to be that painful. And then, like I've heard from other episodes, you just hear fentanyl and you're like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Don't people die from this?
Yeah. Yeah.
So thankfully the hospital brought me to the orthopedic floor instead of the maternity floor for everything.
Wow. You really received great care. It seemed like your care team was very aware of potential triggers.
Yeah. I mean, I was grateful for me. I was grateful that I wasn't on the floor with other people who were pregnant because obviously they wouldn't want to see somebody in that much emotional pain, physical pain, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I was very impressed with how that all was. I did have one nurse tell me not to take Advil after. So I was told by the doctor to alternate Advil and Tylenol. And the nurse on the orthopedic floor told me, oh no, they changed their minds. Don't take the Advil. So that was probably the hardest part because
Yeah.
I was in such bad pain.
Yeah.
And I made it to Friday without having talked to the doctors about it. And then I said to my husband, I was like, I can't even speak. I was in so much pain. So he called the doctor's office and they were shocked. They were like, no, you have to take the Advil. What do you mean you haven't been taking it?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's a few days, right? Without it.
Yeah. So it was a Tuesday that I had the surgery and then I got to Friday and, it was not great.
Yeah.
So then it took until about Sunday for me to be able to move on my own, and not to be waiting until it was time to take the next pill and being in pain in between.
Yeah. Wow. So how long did it take you to physically recover?
I went back to work, I think a week and a half after.
Okay.
But I had stitches in my stomach still. The doctor joked with my husband that it took her longer to close my incision than it did to remove my tube. Which I forgot to mention that she said as soon as she clamped the tube, the tube burst.
Wow.
So they said, thank goodness that I made the decision when I did. She said, because they had literally clamped both sides and it burst.
Wow.
So I was very lucky. I didn't need a blood transfusion or anything like that.
I'm so glad you didn't. And I'm so glad you didn't have to feel the pain of it bursting.
Yeah.
Because I hear it's just unbearable.
Yeah. And it was so funny because I have had all of the pain on my left side. And it was actually my right tube where the pregnancy was.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they said they have no idea why I was feeling it on the opposite side. They said, so strange, but it was your right tube. Because then they kept checking the left because I said I had pain on that side. And they're like, there's nothing in there. But the doctor made sure to check the other tube, make sure everything was clear, the uterus was clear, everything. And she said to me, there was no reason why this should have happened.
Wow. Wow.
My husband was joking because they take pictures during surgery. And he said she's going to want those. So
they analyze it.
Yeah. So I still have the pictures from the surgery.
Okay. Have you looked at them?
Yes.
Okay.
I actually keep one on my phone because it's a little weird, but
well, it's natural, it's you and it's your baby.
Yeah. And that's all that I'll have left of the baby. So to me, it's important to keep that memento because, a lot of times you don't get the ultrasound picture. You don't get to have those cute, profile pics of the baby and everything. So for me, this is my only living, besides my scars, my only living reminder of this pregnancy.
Yeah. It brings you comfort and that's all that should matter. Are you going to purchase anything to remember this
Um,
baby?
I'm thinking of getting a tattoo. So I have a tattoo of my family's birth month flowers,
Mm-hmm.
and I was planning on doing an additional, my husband and I and our children.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that people will do for lost pregnancies are forget-me-nots.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to add a forget-me-not to the tattoo.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That is beautiful. I love that. For a long time following my ectopic, I wanted to get um, something, whether it was the birth month flower of when I was due or an angel wing where I got my blood work all the time following my ectopic. You know, I wanted it just like right in there, and I never ended up doing that. But I know so many women get tattoos, and it's a great, meaningful thing to do.
Yeah.
So, how are you doing now that it's been a few months?
Um, I'm physically doing better.
Mhm.
Um, it was surprising how painful the periods were after.
Yeah.
And they still are. And I read that the first one would hurt, but I was surprised that it's every time.
Mhm.
Um, because, scar tissue is getting stretched.
Yeah.
Um, and it was hard the first time I ovulated after because you're just so angry at your body for moving on so quickly. And,
Mhm.
you know, um, I just kept thinking, I was just pregnant like 3 weeks ago and you're already ready to ovulate. Like it just
Yeah.
felt so unfair.
Right. It's not something you can get over that quickly.
No. And, for your body to feel like it's betraying you by physically getting over it so quickly
Hmm.
was very hard.
Hmm. Yeah. I appreciate you saying that. I think we don't talk about that enough either. That when we talk about friendships and families and seeing everyone's lives just continue to move forward, and in a sense, your body is doing the same thing, yet ourselves physically and mentally are still stuck in the experience that just happened and we can't move on.
Yeah, it was hard, especially, working in a restaurant. We had somebody around right before Easter do a gender reveal at the restaurant. And I wasn't expecting it to be as hard as it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I got so angry. And I said, I will take it out on the guest if I don't remove myself from the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, it's hard to explain to your coworkers because my boss has a child and she hasn't had a loss. I mean, has been very understanding throughout the whole thing as somebody who does have a child.
Mm-hmm.
um but it just was, you just get so angry for the silliest things, the silliest reasons.
Yeah.
My
And
mom
that's,
has a friend who was 2 weeks behind me, and when she was like telling me about her gender reveal, and then even the other day she said, oh, she's starting to pop, and I had to hang up the phone because you're thinking that's where I should be doing that. My belly bump should be starting to show. um so
nobody prepares you for those sorts of circumstances following a loss. And it is so normal to feel angry and almost feel like, why do I feel this way? We talk about it all the time. Like, you're so happy for them, but at the same time, you're sad and angry.
yes.
And it's hard to feel all of those emotions together. And, for the gender reveal at your restaurant, did you know it was happening prior?
No.
Okay. Okay, because I was going to say, if it was an event or something that you guys were preparing for, you can prepare mentally all you want, saying it's going to be okay. I'm going to be able to handle this. I'm good. But then when it actually happens, everything goes out the window,
Absolutely.
and you have to protect your mental health. And so I'm glad that you chose to remove yourself, because you need to be selfish in those moments.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it took me, they asked me to help get the table ready because they had a cake and I wasn't expecting what the cake was going to be. And then when they came out and they were in white and she said, "Oh, she's doing her gender reveal," I just I just had to leave.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially with how soon it was following.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, is there anything that truly made you cope throughout this entire thing?
I think honestly, my husband's attitude through the whole thing. He has just been, when I was in the thick of the hormones all dropping around me from everything, I just kept saying, this was the worst case scenario. This was the worst case scenario. And he looked at me the one day and he said, "This was not worst case scenario." He said, "Worst case scenario was that I lost you." And he said, joking around with me, he's like, "I don't know that baby." So he's like, "I would be so lost without you, because this is something that people still could die from, and it's terrifying that it's 2025 and that we are still at a point where people could die from this."
Yeah, I know. That makes me really sad. And I continue to wonder all the time, what can we do as women who've experienced this? What can we do to make a change in healthcare and for the future of women and pregnancy? I continue to try and figure that out and wonder why something hasn't been done to decrease the chances and the statistics. Just got to continue to hope that something changes.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad that you had your husband. He sounds like a great support system.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a very good guy.
Yeah. He took a couple days off of work to make sure, that I was able to go to the bathroom. I couldn't move off the couch. I couldn't even sleep the first couple nights because I was in so much pain.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Was there anything else you'd like to share?
not that I can think of.
All right. Well, I appreciate you being here and taking the time out of your day. Your story is going to help so many, and I can't wait for you to see the response afterwards.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Ectopic Pregnancy Support Podcast. If you are looking for additional resources, head to ectopicpregnancysupport.com to learn more about my exclusive online support chat. Also, don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Facebook. See you next time.